It's not often you can publish a story that has the entire rugby world talking, but at 8:42 p.m. last night, our good friend, our colleague Rúaidhrí O'Connor sent a tweet that stopped everyone in their tracks. Understand Scott Robertson is no longer the All Blacks coach after the players' feedback was delivered to the NZRU. They're now on the lookout for a replacement 20 months out from the World Cup. Exclusive story below. Rúaidhrí O'Connor, with your journalism hat on, capital J journalism last night. Scott Robertson is out. You were the man at the centre of the story. It's been an interesting 12 hours or so for you, I'd say.
Yeah, it's been an interesting 24 hours, I guess, Will, if not a bit more than that. Not one I expect when I woke up yesterday morning, not something I expected that I'd be doing kind of just as I was putting my son to bed. But this is a weird and wonderful world we're living in. The modern world is very small, and modern communications make these things far easier to kind of put together, or just strange things happen. And it's an unusual one to get. And I mean, someone's lost their job at the end of the day. It's not a great story. I'm sure Scott Robertson's not having a good day, but it's a seismic event for an All Blacks coach to leave his job 2 years out from World Cup on the back of, in fairness, the initial reporting from the New Zealand Herald yesterday from Liam Napier about that player survey. And I've been at, although the New Zealand Rugby Union are now distancing themselves from Rugby O'Connor, been at the centre of this, him kind of it being floated that he isn't coming, he wasn't going to come back to New Zealand and play for the All Blacks on the back of his dissatisfaction. That kind of got the ball rolling and got people talking. And I think there was probably inevitability about Robertson's tenure coming to an end. But yeah, if I was the first one to get it, that's a nice one to get.
Yeah, no, fair play to you. Just before we go any further, a reminder that our podcast is sponsored by Energia, and they also sponsor rugby in Ireland at all levels at grassroots with the Energia AIL, and as official energy partner to Leinster, Connacht and the Irish men's and women's teams. The Energia Rugby for All initiative supports inclusion, welcoming everyone of all abilities to participate in the game. Find out more at energia.ie/rugby and avail of an exclusive home energy offer for rugby fans. You mentioned the New Zealand Herald's article yesterday. For people who might not have been aware, like, there was a players' survey done at the end of 2025, like the end of their whole season. The feedback in it was fairly stark about Scott Robertson, how he was handling things. There was issues flagged around communication, trust, strategy and selection, which is kind of the full gamut, I suppose, of what a coach is doing with their team. Scott Hansen, one of his key assistants, was particularly, I think, singled out, it seems, in this review. And Ardi Sevilla was one of the senior players mentioned as a guy who was so dissatisfied with the direction of the team that he was kind of allegedly threatening to, I suppose, stay on in Japan and maybe not even play at the World Cup. David Kirk, the New Zealand chairman, people might be familiar. He was a captain of their first World Cup winning team in '87. He's been doing a press conference in New Zealand today, kind of going through some, as you said, Rud, kind of distancing, alleging that there's no player revolt, that it was mere feedback that informed their decision but didn't dictate the decision. Obviously, it's still an evolving story. How did you find yourself at the centre of it? I'm sure you precluded journalistic sourcing and whatnot of giving us too many details, but 20,000 kilometres separate Rathmines from Auckland. I checked this before I came on. So, you've managed, though, to do some quality work from afar.
Yeah, like, obviously there are certain things I won't be able to say because I need to protect sources. But I guess what brought this into an Irish realm was the fact that part of that Ardi Sevilla reporting was that Leinster were linked with a move for him. And obviously I woke up yesterday morning and got a few messages, check this out, and rather than just run it as sources or reports in New Zealand link Ardi Sevilla to Leinster, I started trying to establish whether it was true or not. So there's a lot going on at the moment with transfers and things going on. People are talking, messages are flying back and forth. I established fairly quickly that there was no truth in the Leinster. I mean, Leinster's probably a destination of choice for most All Blacks now, given how happy Jordy Barrett and Rico Ione have been to come over and spend a year there. So it's probably an obvious thing for, say, for instance, an agent or someone to float as an idea. And if Ardi Sevilla was seriously looking at Europe, I'm sure he'd consider Leinster. But my sources within Leinster told me that they didn't think he was available. And it quickly became clear that it was kind of that threat indirectly, whoever spoke to Liam, was being dangled to put pressure on Scott Robertson, and that his days were numbered. And just, as the day went on, more messages started flowing, and it became clear as New Zealand started to wake up that things were moving. And I know a number of other journalists, certainly in the UK, and I'm sure like all the New Zealand journalists, it's the summer over there, it's the off season. I'm sure some of them are off, but everyone was chasing this. It was just I was able to establish it, a little bit before a few other people, and was confident in the sources that I had to be able to go with it. I think it was confirmed at 1 a.m. Irish time, so obviously, but I think a couple of other outlets had pretty much confirmed it or established it by the time I was going, able to go to sleep last night and woke up this morning with the news confirmed. So yeah, I think when you read that New Zealand Herald report, and I know the RD survey to Leinster thing was the kind of angle that most interested Irish fans and Irish readers and Irish journalists as it would, because he's arguably the best player in the world. And Leinster are a big team, obviously. You didn't have to dig far within Liam Napier's reporting to know that the end was probably looming, if not nigh. I think most people expected it to go on a few more days, a bit of a longer review. I think the immediacy has caught people in New Zealand by surprise a little bit. I don't think they're expecting them to make the decision last night.
Yeah, just on Scott Robertson's tenure generally, just to catch people up. So 2 years, 2024, 2025, he coached 27 games, won 20 out of 27, which is okay for All Blacks coach. Probably not great, but it's okay. Year one, he played 14 matches, won 10. The losses came at home to Argentina in his first Rugby Championship game, 2 games away to South Africa, and then they were both narrow defeats, and a 1-point loss to France in the Stade de France in a game that was really exciting and good. So year one, you're thinking, okay, that's not too bad. Year two, though, as you say, only 3 defeats from the 13 games, but the 2 damaging ones, the South Africa one, which was an absolute hiding, their record defeat, as you say, and then a heavy defeat in England, and then even that Scotland one they were very lucky to get away with. Ironically, the 2 high points of his tenure were arguably the 2 wins over Ireland. I'm not sure what that says about where Irish rugby is at the moment, that New Zealand under Scott Robertson had 2 fairly comfortable double-digit victories the last 2 years over Ireland. So it's interesting that now is when they've grasped the nettle, because 2026 road is such a big year for New Zealand rugby. They have the Nations Championship like everyone does first up. They have France, Italy and Ireland at home. Then they have that blockbuster tour to South Africa. It might have passed people by. In the summer they're playing 4 tests against the Springboks, and they're also playing midweek games against the Stormers, Bulls, Sharks and Lions. So this has kind of been teed up for a couple of years. There's no Rugby Championship next year as a result. So they obviously want to make sure, and the World Cup obviously looming into view as well in 2027. But I feel like this big Springboks kind of cash cow is potentially looming large in their mind as well, that they really want to get that right.
Yeah, and as an aside, it was investigated that the 4th test, which will be played in Europe, might have been played in Croke Park, but that was unfortunately that the venue wasn't available. But that would have been a pretty interesting thing to happen in Dublin later this year. No, I think they had to do it now if they were going to do it. It's just enough time, as Rassie Erasmus has shown, to pull together a great rugby nation. And I suppose what the difference between New Zealand, South Africa, probably England, France, and the rest is that in 20 months there's enough great players based overseas that you might be able to get back, enough great players within your system, or potential great players within your system, that you can probably make enough changes with a runway like this to get there. And you're right, like the Nations Championship kind of changes everything this year. And I get, you're right to say it's a bit under the radar, both that and the greatest tour, or whatever they're calling that series in the summer. It heightens the level of competition. Like Scott Robertson, his New Zealand team only lost the Rugby Championship on points difference. They finished with 19 points, the same as South Africa. But they were +8 and South Africa were +57. They won 4 from 6, the same as South Africa. So he obviously didn't have the credit in the bank that Rassie Erasmus, who has been contracted until the 2031 World Cup on the basis of his results, had. But he could, I'm sure when he went into the reviews, he could easily argue that with a couple of coaching ticket changes and a couple of player related changes, he wasn't that far off. But David Kirk, like the New Zealand Rugby Union, another side plot to this is that they don't have a CEO right now. Mark Robinson stepped away after 6 years at the end of last season. He would have had a troubled relationship with Ian Foster and was the man who appointed Scott Robertson, which I guess that's a lost ally at the end of the calendar year. They're missing a couple of other senior executives. Their head of leadership, or I can't remember exact. No, their head of performance has gone to Brighton in the Premier League just recently as well. So there's a lot of turmoil happening in New Zealand, and there's a lot of worry in New Zealand as well that it's not really necessarily the head coach who's going to get a tune. That this may be the reality for New Zealand in the future, that the fact that they are this miracle story of an island of 4 to 5 million people who just rugby is their first sport. Like, the demographics have shifted. The rugby is not as popular as it once was, and the kind of biggest nations are getting it together and have a lot more money and a lot more resources, and like New Zealand's supremacy. Even if they appoint the best coach in the world, they might not have the players to be able to keep up with South Africa, who just have this unbelievable wealth of resources. So there's a lot going on in New Zealand at the moment. It's quite existential, but they don't tolerate results dropping or performances dropping. And like, you have to, even though that win over Ireland, it was very jarring in Chicago to see the level of skills that the New Zealand players had on the day, the amount of mistakes. Ireland, I think it's increasingly clear that Ireland were incredibly undercooked for that game and just not ready for it. And New Zealand were just unable for the first hour to put anything together. They were so poor, and they were really there for the taking. And you're right, it is an indicative of more a malign and the Irish team that they couldn't punish them. But also, it was very, very jarring watching in Soldier Field that night how bad the All Blacks skill set were, how unaligned they were as a team, and that's just something you'd always expect of an All Black team. So it's that size of the year ahead, and the fact that we are only 20 months out from World Cup, and the number of games to get it right for that World Cup, which is obviously in New Zealand's backyard, that's forced, I think, and also the player dissatisfaction. Like, how do you turn that around if your senior players have lost faith in you, and you've just had a very unhappy 5 or 6 week tour together? That's a big coaching challenge to try and turn that around. The thing with Ian Foster was, when he came under pressure, the senior players, with Seve at the heart of it, went to bat for him. Like in South Africa, when he was about to lose his job on the back of losing the series to Ireland, the senior players were the ones who saved his bacon. If they're not willing to go to back to you, to go to bat for you, you've very little to fall back on. And that's what's led us to today's news.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Ian Foster. I think the worst thing to happen to Scott Robertson was New Zealand beating Ireland in that World Cup quarter final, because it set the expectations among All Blacks supporters and All Blacks pundits that they were still at the very top of the sport. Then they got to the World Cup final, obviously only lost by a point, but in reality, the years up to that, they were not at the very, very top table. They were able to summon it, come back together and produce a great display and beat Ireland. But it meant when Robertson took over, he had no runway to falter at first, because people were like, oh, well, Foster just got them to the World Cup final, so you should come in and immediately do what you've done at the Crusaders, which is win I think he won 7 in a row of Super Rugby. But in fact, as you say, the landscape of South Africa, France, and now laterally England getting their acts together meant the landscape was different, albeit the expectations were probably the exact same. So he was actually in a tough enough spot from that regard. Not that he did everything right, as you said. Leon McDonald left after 5 games, as an assistant. That's not a good sign. And then, as you said, Jason Holland leaving at the end of this year. But I feel like he was probably watching that quarter final, being like, "Oh, I actually know. I'm not sure if this is great for me."
Yeah, and if you remember, he was in France and he was kind of hanging around, and he was banned from attending All Blacks training, and I think even banned from attending All Blacks games because they didn't want the kind of the Raj Cam effect of the kind of the camera flashing to him every time anyone made a mistake. So there's I think the biggest thing for him as well, I agree with you there, but I also think that the exodus of senior players after that World Cup, either players like Richie Mwanga, who would have been his starting out half, he went to Japan, and that's again a sign that against New Zealand, they've brought in private money to try and fend off the Japanese money and the European money, but they still can't keep their top talent at home. I mean, they don't want Jordy Barrett and Rico Ioane spending a season in Ireland. That's not really part of their plan, but they've just got to bake in sabbaticals to let lads come over and earn money. And look, they'll get some expertise out of it, but really they don't want to lose control of their players. And Mwanga spending 2 seasons, or he's into his 3rd year in Japan this year, isn't he? So for him to spend that much time in Japan, even though they expect him to come back from the World Cup, he's Razor's man. He was the key player for that Crusaders team. He was a key architect of that defeat of Ireland. As were, Sam Whitelock retired. Sam Cane went to Japan. I think he hung around the All Blacks for a while, Sam Cane, but he was always going to retire. Aaron Smith, huge player for the All Blacks as well. He left. Ritalik left. You're looking at some all-timers there. And then there's been also a big criticism of him was that he didn't have enough international experience within his coaching setup. Obviously, Joe Schmidt left the ticket, having been a key part of Ian Foster's setup. Jason Ryan stayed on, but McDonald leaving so soon, Holland leaving soon, this year as well. That stability that you expect from a successful international coaching ticket just hasn't been there. And the idea I think everyone had was that Robertson, who's an incredibly popular figure in New Zealand on the back of his Crusaders wins, the fact that he showed a bit of personality, he did breakdancing on the pitch after they won their championships, all that stuff, and he was just a very different kind of figure. People loved that about him, but once it looked a bit loose on the pitch, I think it was used as a stick to beat him to some degree, and it's turned very quickly. The tide has turned very quickly against him. He would have replaced Foster had the players allowed the NZRU to remove Foster in 2022, and that must have been part of their thinking. They were very loyal to that kind of boot room of Graham Henry into Steve Hansen into Ian Foster. That's been the All Blacks way, to have that internal promotion from within, and to bring in an ex-All Black and a coach who'd proven himself so well in club game just hasn't worked for whatever reason, and it's that's why we're at this point.
Yeah, well, there's reports that he might be in the frame for the Harlequins job, which was, that'd be some come down to going from the All Blacks to coaching Harlequins. But I saw the UK, some of your colleagues over there were reporting that. David Kirk also mentioned at the press conference that he can't coach a Tier 1 team, I think, between now and the World Cup, so he won't be popping up anywhere else internationally, I don't think, until then. But who's going to be the All Blacks coach? I think you were saying to me, we were chatting beforehand, Jamie Joseph is the favourite. For me, it has to be. Has to be Joe Schmidt. He is the only coach out there, I think, that this is his time. He's literally leaving Australia. We saw him do it in 2023, albeit as an assistant. For me, Jamie Joseph has a good record with Japan, but there's no guarantee if Tony Brown can't come with them, who's already in South Africa. They've been a package deal during his coaching career. All the success he's had has been with Tony Brown. For me, it has to be Joe Rudd. It just has to be. I don't know how they can look at this and not think this is tailor-made for Joe to come in and do what Joe can do.
Well, I don't know if Joe would want it. I think I'm sure he'd like the idea of it, but I mean, it's not a very easy job.
It's easier than coaching Australia.
Well, I don't know. I think pressure-wise, it's one of the toughest jobs in world sport because of the scrutiny. And I think Joe Schmidt enjoyed when he was with Ian Foster. He never did media. He was kind of in the background. He was able to coach. I think he would probably, if he was going to be involved, and I don't think he will, because I also think he's built up a relationship with the Australian players over the course of 3.5 years before a home World Cup. I expect them to still be involved with Australia through to that World Cup in a kind of a advisor capacity to Les Kiss. It would be pretty. I don't think he would do it. I don't think he would go back to New Zealand having been Australia's coach for 3 years, and he would feel that it's knifing him in the back a little bit. I think he wants to complete the job. There's a loyalty. I know he's a New Zealander, but he has invested heavily into this Australian project over 3 years. He's worked hard at it. I think it would be difficult for him personally, to just, he'd have to quit now and go back to New Zealand straight away. He wouldn't be able to see this through. And like Joe Schmidt, I've had my run-ins with Joe Schmidt over the years, but I know he's a thoroughly decent person, and I think he would feel a professional obligation to Australia. Look, the word in New Zealand is definitely floating around that it's Jamie Joseph, and I would expect him to be able to recruit and bring Tony Brown back if he gets the gig. I don't have any information.
If I was Tony Brown, I wouldn't be swapping Springboks for New Zealand if I was Tony Brown.
Maybe not, but I mean, it might suit the Springboks to be able to do what they're planning to do anyway and bring Jacques Nienaber back a year early. So it's and that might suit Leinster.
But Brown is doing the attack, Brown is the attack guru, not like
but they've got Felix Jones there. He could easily switch into that role, and they have options. Look, I think this is going to be a bit of a, like any job like this opening up. There's going to be a domino effect. Joseph's within the New Zealand system. Look, Vern Cotter's another option. He's got international experience. He potentially could lure Joe Schmidt back. He could hold the fort for that Nations Championship and then convince Joe to come back in after that, because of their prior, long existing prior working relationship. I think Dave Rennie's another figure who has been around that scene for a long time. I think whatever way you look at it, Wayne Smith is going to be involved, like the coaching guru of all coaching gurus in New Zealand, and if he's in there with Brown and Joseph, and even if Brown, they can't get Brown back, having Wayne Smith involved, if they break glass and call Wayne Smith back in, that will be a big asset to them as well. Look, New Zealand's like the home of coaching. The other figure like people are mentioning, and I don't see this happening, is Clayton McMillan, who I think is seen as a very much a long-term prospect to be the All Blacks coach in the future, but he's in Ireland to get his overseas experience. And I don't think this is the time. I think Munster fans can. I know the last time there was a big coaching change, 18 months out from World Cup, it was Rassie Erasmus, the Munster coach, who was called in to fix things in South Africa. But I think McMillan is over here to get 2 or 3 years of good European experience, to then go back to New Zealand with that and do his time. And I wouldn't say he's in any rush. I could be wrong. Maybe he is the one that they'll come down on, but I don't see it right now. I think he's still an All Black coach in waiting rather than one right now. And I think it's a bit of a crisis point. I think it needs an experienced hand. Joe would be an excellent appointment. I'm not disputing that. He would be an excellent appointment.
I take your point about coaching Australia. They're at home World Cup. He's invested time to go to the All Blacks would be maybe a little, not a betrayal is too strong, but I just think the stars have aligned. The job has come available as he's leaving. Like, if for him never to coach the All Blacks would just be a travesty, I think. If I was a New Zealander, that would be the name. Of all the names you've listed there, like Vern Cotter, like Joe Schmidt is a more successful coach than Vern Cotter. Vern Cotter's had a good career, and but I just think Joe, what the All Blacks need, I think, is what Joe can deliver them. There's not this cavalry of new young players to bed in and bring in necessarily. Like, it's got to be kind of what he did in 2023, working with the existing talent and maximising them, and that's a Joe trait. It's funny you mentioned Wayne Smith, just as an aside. He's the only other All Blacks coach who has been let go midway through a World Cup cycle. So there's a bit of similarity there with Scott Robertson. It's only happened twice in the World Cup era, and I think it was or in the professional era rather, and it was Wayne Smith who actually, as you said, is a coaching guru. But yeah, I suppose, sorry, I could have crossed my own point there, but Joe, I think, would be the best man for the job. But
I think
doesn't sound like he'll be getting.
And I think Cotter could potentially convince him, but I think he would prefer to be in with someone who would front the kind of stuff he doesn't want to do, so he could be a tracksuit coach. But look, I stranger things have happened. I've surprised. The last 24 hours has been surprising. I'm ready to be surprised again.
What about Raj? Any chance Raj gets the bat signal?
I don't think they'll go overseas.
Yeah,
I
don't see it either.
Never appointing an overseas head coach. I think someone like O'Gara, Lancaster, both have things they could offer to New Zealand, especially working with players of that caliber. I'm sure anyone would love to do it, but I just think that's one of the last jobs that they will, like, out of their cold, steely hands, they won't want to give that to an overseas coach. And in fairness, like the list of names we've given, they are high end coaches.
Oh, they are, yeah.
And like Joe, I know Joseph had done he's got a lot of international experience. He's also knows the players. He'd be a popular internal appointment. He doesn't have necessarily the kind of press conference TV charisma, but I think he's got a charisma of his own as well. And I think they will go for an internal solution. And he'd be the most likely. On Robertson and Harlequins, look, I think he's going to get a lot of offers. I think this will damage him to some degree, but not especially from a club point of view, an ability to, slightly off Broadway. Like, if you're a Harlequins coach, you're not on the news every night. It's not the front and center of everything. He could quietly build something quite special with that. And he's still a relatively young man, and he can learn from this experience and come back for it. I'm not saying he's going to get the Harlequins job, but if he's precluded from going into international coaching for the next year and he wants to get out in New Zealand, because I'm sure this is a difficult enough time for him, that's not a bad job. I think he could turn Harlequins into a pretty, listen to their CEO talking to the Times recently. Like, they're spending big, even though they're not getting results. So maybe that's not a bad fit for him. He's worked in France before. He'd be, like, if any Irish job comes up in the next year or two, he'd be right in the mix for any of those in terms of the provinces anyway. And I think he'll bounce back from it long term. But I'd say it's a horrific, like, to be a proud New Zealander, to be let go at this point of a World Cup cycle, 2 years into getting your dream job. And the statement was quite emotional that he put out today. It's devastating for him. So I think he will bounce back. I wonder, would he rush into something that quickly, or does he just want to get working again and kind of rebuild that reputation somewhere far away from his hometown?
Yeah, well, it was certainly a bombshell story last night, detonated by Rúaidhrí O'Connor in Dublin, 20,000 kilometres away from New Zealand. I'm sure have you been inundated with calls from the morning shows over there, or the late night shows, whatever the time difference is?
No, not really. I think once they kind of got got onto themselves yesterday. Obviously, I had the advantage of the time zone and stuff as well. They were able to firm it up themselves, and yeah, it's unusual when an Irish person breaking a story like this, but no, I haven't been on I have been on New Zealand radio before, but not today. So I'll leave them at it.
Yeah, well, yeah, take a well-earned break. You were working late into the night last night, but yeah, a huge story. Can't wait to see what happens there. You know, a load of different options. As you said, sounds like Jamie Joseph is the clubhouse leader. I'm sure we will get some clarity on that in the near future, rather. For the moment, Rud, thanks so much for joining me. That's all we have time for on this emergency podcast of The Left Wing, sponsored by Energia. We'll be back next Tuesday with another show, reviewing the final round of European action. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and goodbye.